Oh, yeah,
I meant to get to you sooner, but
well, they made Gary Hildebrand official, and they also made that switch with the 6 deputies. So I said, thank you. I just take one. You go up to the boss.
I'm good. You? Long day at work?
As usual.
As usual.
Got home about 20 minutes ago.
if I could, I'd like to call the regular July 15th, 2014 Temple City City Council meeting to order. Could I have the roll call, please? There he is.
So now we can.
Okay. Could I have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Sternquist.
Present.
Councilmember Vizcarra. Here. Councilmember Yu.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Chavez.
Here.
Mayor Bloom.
Here. This evening, our invocation will be provided by Pastor Andrew Kickert. He's the pastor of Sunrise Community Church at 9642 East Live Oak Avenue. He's been an elder there since 1997, and he became pastor in 2001. Please stand for the invocation.
Gracious Father, we come before you and we ask for wisdom for these men and women as they seek to lead this fine city. Lord, I ask that you would give them discernment in the matters that are brought before them, that they would think through them and analyze them properly, that they would give ear to those that have business before this council and not consider them based on privilege or rank within the community, but giving all a voice. And Lord, I ask that you'd enable them to govern diligently in the work that's been presented before them, that they would be honored for their time and their effort. And we ask this in your gracious name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. I've asked Commissioner Jim Cliff to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ladies and gentlemen, please place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, you know, I've been doing Little League games for the past 2 weeks, and usually when we finish with the Pledge of Allegiance, we do the Little League Pledge. I almost went into the Little League Pledge right now, so we'll bypass that one.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And you usually say play ball right after
yeah,
that?
there you go.
All right. All right, this evening we have no ceremonial matters. That's item 5. Item 6 is public comments on items not listed on the agenda. I have 3 speakers. First is Virgil Graff, and following Virgil is his wife Marilyn. And they get 3 minutes each. I told them they can sort of combine theirs too, as long as they keep within the 6 minutes.
I'm Virgil Graff. I live at 6118 Primrose, and I have some concerns about this sidewalk project. They marked out the street today in the sidewalk area. My concern is a safety concern. You have a chart in front of you. The first page shows the traffic flow that occurs every morning, noon, and afternoon for Longden School. The traffic is so severe that it's almost impossible to back out your driveway, let alone have children walking through this area. I'd like you to go now to page 2. On page 2, the green indicates the path as was marked out today and has probably been agreed to with the contractor. Putting the path on the east side, crossing the Flaherty at the corner of Primrose and Flaherty to the north side of Flaherty, and then goes along the west side of Longden, or of Primrose, and crosses at Wyndon. At the corner of Flaherty and Primrose, the traffic goes around that corner in a very, very fierce manner every morning. One right after the other, zing, 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 zing. For a child to cross there is going to be dangerous. What's even worse is for a child to cross from the southwest corner of Wyndon to the northwest corner, because they back up from the entrance driveway to the drop-off zone of Longden School. Sometimes they back up solid almost down to the bend at Primrose and Flaherty. And then there's a third hazard for the children going in the gate there at the drop-off area. So you've got some real serious problems there. They need to at least consider. I know you can't take any action tonight, but you might want to step back and take a look at that project. Page 3 is my suggestion. My children grew up on that. We've been there 45 years plus. We walked them across the street to the west side of Primrose. They walked counterflow, facing traffic all the way to the school, never had an incident, never had an accident. So I'm suggesting that you really take another look at this. And there's some pictures on the back that I took at noon today, and of course this is summer school. The top left picture, Primrose and Flaherty, this is where you'll have a dangerous spot. The people come flying around there, one right after the other, barely a break between them. The picture on the bottom is the corner at Primrose and New Wyndon. This was taken at 11:45 this morning, summer school hours. You can see 3 cars standing there waiting to get in to the parking lot. The children would have to walk across that intersection from just behind that parked car at the lower left corner to where the tip of the arrow is between those 2 white cars. That's a dangerous spot. There is a gate at the west end of the sidewalk in front of the Longden School. This would be exit gate from the drop-off area. So it would be safe for the children to walk all the way around Flaherty. I don't even know what that other street is. And up and come in from the west side. And the lower right-hand side on this picture, traffic is backed up to get in the pickup zone in front of the school. This is what kids would have to contend with. So I think you need to take another look at this. Just from the safety aspect, did we do a real good? Unfortunately, school's out. You just can't believe how bad this traffic is in the morning. At that gate to the entrance of the drop-off area, they whiz in there and they back up, and those people have one concern in their mind, dropping off the kid. I almost got hit there walking one morning. So, I was watching. I caught this person out of the corner of my eye. She cut right in front of me after I stepped off the gate. That wasn't a curb, but the downslope there, to the point I could have reached out in front and touched her car. They're not looking for children this tall. So the city needs to at least take a look before you get too far into the project. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
I really appreciate, the very thorough analysis. Appreciate you bringing it forward to us. I mean, our goal is to try to make it safer. If we're not, we'll ask staff to go back and take a look at this. I know they've worked with the people at the schools, whether this got missed or whatever. I do appreciate it. I mean, you've done nice work. You do good staff work. And,
Thank you. You want to hire me?
Very thorough with pictures and diagrams. I mean, it's very clear what you have. So
Any
I'll
other
refer it
questions?
to I'll refer it to staff, to our city
Sure.
engineer, to take a look at it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Marilyn Graff, live at 6118 Primrose, and I'm a retired Temple City High School teacher. So Peggy was in my class. So I understand the importance of having students have a safe way to get to school. This the way it's laid out and the fact of children having to cross two streets is just a really scary thing for me, especially if it simply moved to the west side of the streets. I don't think they'd have to cross a single street. The other thing I've noticed is we go walking most every morning, and there's a number of parents who not only drop their children off at school, they park their car and walk them into the playground. And so in addition to all the cars lined up, then they're trying to find a place to park as that happens. So it's kind of scary when I think about the traffic that's there. I don't know how far you are on the project. I know that most of our neighbors have just recently heard about it. I don't know if it can be tabled until September. I think it would be incredibly wise for it to be tabled until school starts, and you can make some field trips and notice what happens. Basically from 10 minutes till 8 in the morning until 8:15 in the afternoon, it is one solid stream of cars. And we've already had to go out and have one of us stop traffic if we had to leave to go somewhere. I understand parents want their kids to get there safe, and they're feeling like driving them is a very safe way to get there. But there's a few students who walk, and this is a real safety issue. And as a former teacher, I want those kids to get to school safe. I want them to learn and be productive citizens. So any questions that I could add?
No, I thank you. You know, we obviously have a significant problem at all of our schools.
Mm-hmm.
You know, part of what we're attempting to do is getting, safer routes to school so we get more kids
Right.
out of cars.
Oh, that
to
would be a
walk in
perfect thing to
and
have
doing that,
happen.
because it's the cars that are causing most of the problems at
Right.
the schools.
Right.
And, and
They
it's every
ha-
school, it's not just this school.
They have changed the traffic patterns, but it doesn't seem to stop the amount of traffic that's there. So,
Well, again, I really appreciate, you as residents of the area and as citizens bringing this up. I mean, you're the eyes on the ground right
Okay.
there at ground zero, so
Okay.
we appreciate it, and thank you for coming forward. We'll work with the city manager, our city engineer, and staff and see where we are. And I know I think we awarded the contract. The goal was to get all this work done during the summer while school was out, so we'll
yeah.
have them take a look at it and
Hopefully they
see.
can take a look at it later.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you so very
Okay.
much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Okay, third person is Jing Lee from the library program.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Jing Li. I'm the library manager from Temple City Library. I'm here tonight to talk about our upcoming library programs. And the summer reading program is still happening. So every week we give out Starbucks gift card and Zop's gift card. So if you want to read some books and also receive some prize, and please join us for summer reading program. You don't need to come to the library. Actually, you can go to our website and sign up online. And also from June 18 to August 27, we are also had the neighborhood produce exchange program 6:30 to 7:45. When the concert is in section. So if you do vegetable gardening, you have extra vegetable or fruit, and you can bring to the library, and we have a table in front of the library. So you can exchange with your neighbors. And then next Saturday, which is June 26th, for high school and their parents, we offer a financial aid workshop. So we'll talk to the teens about the tips how to apply for financial aid to get money to go to college. So that's July 26th from 10 to 11:30. So upcoming in August, and one of the Saturday, which is August 16th, from 11 to 12, we are going to have a free summer concert. We have a band, it's called Upstream. They're going to come to the library to perform the free public concert. So this concert is sponsored by Los Angeles Supervisor Antonovich. So hope to see all of you at the library. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jing. Okay, anyone else care to speak on any item that's not on the agenda here tonight? Okay, if not, I will close the public comment. We'll move to item 7 on the calendar. It's a consent calendar. I believe the city clerk has one announcement to make at the beginning.
Mayor and City Council, with your approval, I'd like to make a change to the meeting minutes from July 1st near the closed session to reflect that it was Mayor Pro Tem Chavez and not Bloom that left the closed session after the first item was heard.
Okay? Okay, with that adjustment, I'll enter, does anyone,
Motion to approve.
okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent calendar. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the consent calendar is approved unanimously. We move to item 8 on the agenda. It's a public hearing. This is for the approval of an annual fee and fine schedule for fiscal year 2014-15, incorporating all current fees and fines and establishing new city fees for planning, public works, public safety and services, and community preservation services. I believe we have a short presentation.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The purpose of this public hearing was for the city council to consider the annual master schedule of fees and fines for fiscal year 14-15, which would include updated fees for service related to items such as plan check, permit, and inspections, primarily under the Community Development Department. We had hoped to have all of that prepared for you this evening to consider. However, we are continuing to work with TransTech, which is the city's contractor for a lot of our plan check and inspection services, to make sure that we capture all of the costs for those services and make sure that the proposed fee schedule that we bring back to you accurately reflects all of the costs of those services, to make sure that we get a fee schedule that accurately captures all of those costs. So we are requesting this evening that this public hearing be opened and that the council receive any comments that there may be from the public, and that the hearing be continued to the council meeting date of August 19th.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, if not, I will open the public hearing, if anyone would care to speak on this item. Okay, if not, I will entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to, what date are we after? August?
August 19th, 2014.
August 19th.
Yeah, make a motion to continue the public hearing to August 19th, 2014, to provide staff with additional time to complete the analysis of service costs.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, the item has passed. The public hearing will be continued to August 19th. Thank you very much. We now go to new business. Item 10A is the dissolution of the Audit Ad Hoc Committee, establishment of an Audit Standing Committee, and adoption of an Audit Standing Committee charter. We have a presentation by the...
Did we? 10. We got 9A.
No, we didn't.
We didn't do unfinished business.
Oh, yeah, excuse me. All right, well, as long as Tracy's there, I'm out of order. Well, let's see. Let's do the unfinished business. Tracy, you're going to have to give up your seat for a minute. Item 9, unfinished business. 9A is examples of different types of physical improvements to be completed as part of the city's Safe Routes to School project. If you recall at last meeting, we had a presentation on that, and there was, I think, some questions from the audience and council members that it'd be nice to see some examples of what they are, so I believe that's what this presentation is.
It is. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. You are correct. On July 1st, the City Council accepted and awarded a Public Works contract for the Safe Routes to School project, during which time Council Member Yu and members of the public expressed an interest in seeing some visual examples of the different types of physical improvements to be completed as part of this project, and this is the presentation. As noted in the screen, on the screens behind you and in your staff packet, are general examples of the zebra striping that is slated to happen at certain intersections throughout the project, and the street striping with regards to school ahead or speed limit or crosswalk or school crossing that will happen on streets. These are the ADA ramps and the truncated domes that we had some discussions about at the July 1st meeting. The signage will include the signage before you, which is school speed limit signage, and school ahead, which has the universal symbol for school crossing. That is the same on this slide. This is an example of the speed feedback signs that are due to be at 6 locations. The school speed limit sign, this is minus the times. That speed will always be in effect regardless of the time of day. They are solar powered, and they begin flashing once you go above the speed limit. This is a better view of the street striping in conjunction with the signage. These are not Temple City locations. The picture to your left is the LED signage, the solar LED signage that is slated for 4 locations as part of this project. And it will also be done in conjunction in areas where there is BTA or bicycle travel zones, and a better look at the markings on the street from a distance. These are recently completed SR2S projects in the cities of Commerce that TransTech was the lead engineer on. As you can see, there is zebra striping with thermoplastic, using thermoplastic as opposed to paint, along with ADA ramps and the truncated domes. These are the actual speed feedback signage, and the picture on your left is the LED signage, the actual LED signage that will be used in 2 of the 4 locations. And these are activated by hitting a button, and they're shown to be, the maintenance is better than using the in-ground LED lighting, which most people don't pay attention to anymore. And with that, I can take any questions that you may have.
Okay, does any council member have any questions?
So how is the speed indicator activated? You said it's by hitting a button?
No, the LED crosswalk
Oh,
signage.
crosswalks, okay.
Yeah, that's activated by hitting a button.
Okay.
Okay, anybody in the audience have any questions on these? Jerry?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Jerry Jambazian. I understood everything, and it makes perfect sense, but I'm not sure I understand what are truncated domes. And the second thing is, I remember at a few council meetings, there were some people that got up here.
Do they flash or they just light up?
They flash, sir.
That's all I want to know.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Mary?
Mary Coqueco, Temple City resident. What I don't understand, years ago, when my family was going to Longden and some other people, they used to pick them up on the back end of the school. I don't know what street that was. Everybody wasn't going out on Longden. And then they also had, I forget if it's Oak Avenue, there used to be an entrance there, so you could pick up the kids there. Now, everybody's being picked up in Longden, which to me doesn't make sense. There's 3 different entrances to the school, and it would go by, like the kindergarten kids would be in a certain, they were in back. So why don't they pick up at the other entrances, not just everything on Longden? That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, Mary, just following up, the graphs issue is on the backside of Longden, so they're dropping them off not only on Longden, but they're also on the backside. Okay, any other comments on this item? Okay, if not, I'll close public comments, and since this was a received presentation, we've received it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Now go to new business, item 10. Item 10A is the dissolution of the Audit Ad Hoc Committee, establishment of an Audit Standing Committee, and adoption of an Audit Standing Committee charter. And we'll have a presentation by Administrative Services Director House.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I'm going to give you a little background to refresh your memory. As you recall, in fiscal year 2000.
Yeah, is your microphone on?
It wasn't, sorry about that. As you recall, in fiscal year 2011 and 2012, the Los Angeles Civic Grand Jury expressed concern about potential abuse of charter cities in California. And again, this really was a result of the heels of the issues with the City of Bell and City of Vernon. In January 2012, all county charter cities completed a questionnaire by the grand jury regarding current practices of charter cities, including other things, but it also included financial management practices. In November 2013, the city responded to that grand jury report, and for greater transparency and accountability, one of the recommendations made in the report was that the cities formally establish an audit committee, making the committee directly responsible for work of the independent audit. As a result of this recommendation, the mayor, in concurrence with the city council in January, February of 2014, appointed an audit ad hoc committee, I've spelled ad wrong, sorry about that, to explore the alternative structures of an audit committee and to also explore possible duties and responsibilities. The ad hoc committee that was appointed consisted of Mayor Pro Tem Chavez, Councilmember Yu, and Planning Commissioner Steve Curran, who is a certified public accountant. The City Council requested at that time that the Audit Ad Hoc Committee return with a recommendation to the city within the next 6 months. The Ad Hoc Audit Committee met on several occasions and determined that the more traditional audit committee, which I'll go into a little bit more specifics in a few moments, should be established in accordance with Government Finance Officers Association's best practices. The Ad Hoc Committee also drafted a charter that outlines the responsibilities and duties of the proposed Audit Committee, including assisting the City Council in monitoring, overseeing, and assessing the city's accounting and financial reporting processes, and also to provide an avenue for communication among the independent auditors, city management, and the City Council. As a result, staff is recommending this evening that this committee be a standing committee, as the structure and the scope of the duties are ongoing over multiple fiscal years. So as indicated in your staff report, we're recommending this evening that the City Council dissolve the Audit Ad Hoc Committee, appoint an Audit Standing Committee, including a chairman and vice chairman, and adopt an Audit Standing Committee charter that has been drafted and is in your staff report for review. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay.
What would be the structure? I mean, like, would it be a monthly meeting and then recommendations back to this body?
Well, really, they're initially, to start out with, there would only be only be a need for 3 meetings, and that would be to meet with our auditors in what is traditionally called an entrance conference, where they kind of outline the scope of the audit and their approach and that sort of thing, which now they do with staff anyway. But then this would just provide additional oversight. And then the second meeting would probably be, sometime during the mid-term of the field work with the auditors, or maybe when the field work ends, and they would report to the committee any possible concerns that they might have found during their field work. And then when their opinion is released and the financial statements are essentially certified as being fairly presented, then they would meet a third time with this audit committee just to, again, go over any issues that may have arose during.
With the standing committee?
With the standing committee, correct.
Why couldn't they just come here and do that?
Well, they could, but again, the whole purpose of this separate audit committee is to provide an oversight to the independent audit process so that the city council typically would not be that involved with the audit process. So if you're proposing not to have an audit committee, but yet you want this oversight, you want to do this oversight yourself, then you would need to plan to meet with the auditors, basically recommended 3 times through the course of, through the months of September through December.
And are those the auditors we're already using?
Mm-hmm, correct.
I mean,
Now,
motherhood and apple pie, but it seems like redundant.
Well, and the other thing is this audit committee, as again being recommended to be more traditional, is they would also review this when we do go out for new auditors, go out on an RFP for new auditors, which typically we should do every 5 years. So we're coming upon that. Staff would issue the RFP, obviously provide the evaluation, share that with the audit standing committee, and make a recommendation, and then the audit committee would then make that recommendation to the entire city council.
You were going to say?
In essence, the audit committee is adding another layer of accountability. Basically, staff right now, the structure is staff work with the external auditor. Basically, the external auditor will have access only to staff and back and forth. So the audit committee will basically inserting another layer in between. So the outside auditors is really directly reporting back to the committee, the standing committee. So to gives a level of impartiality, and so let's say they'll be there at least reviewing the RFP process, making sure that the process is fair and impartial and all that. So it's something that's recommended as a best practice for small cities, and that's what we're following.
Okay, any other council member questions?
I'll just add one more thing, and then this audit committee would also evaluate any other issues that may come up.
Like?
As in, like we just mentioned, maybe review the process for the RFP process, or any other issues that may come up that the city council may want the audit committee to review.
Now, how broad's their scope?
Well, it's pretty detailed in their charter.
So it's pretty broad.
Well, no.
It's not that broad. It's actually mainly it's representing the city and city council dealing with the external auditor, because we're the one that in the end have to accept the reports. So instead of staff recommending to us that we accept a report that's auditing staff, so we're accepting a report as a council, a report that the committee had been working through and
I guess
in
I was just
agreement.
having trouble seeing the difference. But, all right.
I think it's important to remember, too, that the auditor, even though they work from staff, is an independent auditor who has a fiduciary responsibility to do the audit, and they may not always, and they may make recommendations and make suggestions in terms of the staff process and things. So, as Councilman, you point out, it's another layer, but it's not usurping the ultimate authority of the city council to make decisions. There was a lot of discussion at the committee over what their roles and responsibilities. There was even some suggestions that give them some independent authority, which is not provided for them through our structure. It's really up to the city council to make the decisions. So it's another layer, but I think it's really important to reinforce it. They're still independent auditors, and I think in today's world of local government, some audit firms have gotten into a lot of trouble because they were too casual and maybe even cavalier in looking at audits of some local governments. We don't need to name we all know who they are. So auditors are on really even a heightened awareness and alert in terms of the work they do to be independent. But it does give another layer, but it doesn't usurp any of the authority. And yes, there is a little bit of redundancy, but I think the grand jury felt that in smaller cities that don't have the resources to create segregation of responsibilities, like you don't have enough staff to do all that. So it's a layer that they recommended, and I don't think it causes any real a lot of extra work or issues for the city.
Okay. Thank you. Any other council questions? Okay, I'll open it for public comments. Anybody care to speak on this? If not, I will close public comments. Let me ask a question probably for our city manager or city attorney on setting up a standing committee. Does a council member have to be a chairperson of that committee? Because we have a couple standing committees where we have commissioners that are on the standing committees.
No, if you decide that the chairperson of the committee is going to be, because of its joint membership, somebody other than a council member, that's fine. That's within your discretion.
Okay. Okay, I will entertain a motion to dissolve the audit ad hoc committee and to set up a audit standing committee and to adopt the audit standing committee charter, and then I will appoint people after we handle this motion.
So moved.
It's been moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Nobody's opposed. It's unanimously carried. And with that, I would like to appoint the committee. I'd like to, as Steve Curran, who's a CPA, to be the chairman, Councilmember Yu to be vice chair, and Mayor Pro Tem Chavez to be the third member of that committee. Okay, item 10B, direction on percent for art ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to start the report off and then pass it over to Brian
Okay.
to continue.
Okay?
By way of background, as you know, that in August 2012, the City Council adopted Ordinance 12-960, which formalized the Arts in Public Places program and established a Public Arts Commission. And in January of 2014, the commission recommended its initial annual plan for City Council consideration. And then in May of this year, the council approved the Public Arts Annual Plan. And if you look at the plan, the number one priority within that plan, which you approved, was to establish a percent for art ordinance and administrative guidelines. So as a result, staff prepared this report for this evening to seek some guidance and direction regarding some of what we consider the more significant policy issues regarding the preparation of an arts ordinance that staff can leave with, and that direction can serve staff, the commission, as well as the city attorney's office. The report does include a lot of administrative areas, which we provide for your information only. Our suggestion is you try to just focus on the key policy issues tonight, give us a direction, and not get too involved in the discussion of some of the technicalities, which will have to ultimately be in the ordinance, but that could be a discussion for a whole nother day. So really what we're looking for is some general direction on some key issues, and then we will start work on that with the goal of bringing it back to you with an ordinance in the fall. So with that, I'd like to have Brian Hayworth, our assistant to the city manager, walk you through the report. Brian?
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, City Council members. Just to provide some general context on the percent for art ordinance. Percent for art ordinances have been around since 1959, starting first in Philadelphia to impose a percentage of the total value of a project. In this case, it was a public improvement project, taking 1% of that valuation and requiring an allocation for public art. Cities nationally, especially in the last 2 decades, have expanded their public art programs through similar ordinances, not only looking at the ordinance from a capital improvement or public project level, but also looking at imposing a fee on private developments, either through an art donation or through an in lieu fee. Currently, out of the 88 cities in Los Angeles County, 32 have public art programs, and that includes the city of Temple City. Nearly half of the 32 programs, or 16 of the programs in Los Angeles County, have an art set aside for public capital improvement projects, meaning that these municipalities will put generally 1% of the total capital improvement project cost. They'll make that available for a public art piece. All programs within Los Angeles County that do operate public art programs, they do require private developments to provide art on-site or as an in lieu fee. So at this point right now, we're the only city in Los Angeles County that does not have such a fee or an imposition on private development, but that's why we're here tonight. Percent for art ordinances.
Mr. Hayward,
Yeah.
can you clarify that? You mean of the 16 that have a percentage for art, or do you mean all 88 cities?
No, I'm sorry, the 16 of the 32.
Okay.
Yes. Percent for art ordinances, they obviously underscore a belief that public art not only preserves local heritage and fosters creative placemaking, but especially in the last few decades, cities are understanding that in order to have successful public art programs and to maintain those public art programs, you do need a reliable and stable funding source for long-term sustainability. So percent for art ordinances have become a best practice in the public art world. Percent for art ordinance, which we'll be talking about tonight, typically incorporates three components. One of them being a percent for art requirement on public projects or city capital improvement projects. It also includes a percent for art requirement on private projects or private development projects. And then finally, the governing guidelines that administer the percent for art fee. And as the city manager had said, we're not going to touch on that tonight. In fact, that discussion is more appropriate on the Public Arts Commission level. But we thought just for good measure to provide that in the staff report so that you can understand the complexity in developing such an ordinance. So the first item or looking of where we need the direction is, should the city impose a percent for art requirement on private development? And if so, what are considered eligible and exempt projects? What is the desired set-aside percentage for art? And is there a certain threshold valuation that triggers that requirement to be in effect? And finally, is an in lieu fee preferred? So to start with this discussion, the definition of trigger projects and their valuation thresholds vary significantly from city to city. When you look at a lot of these ordinances, some of them dating back at least locally in the early 80s, they've been amended so many times because of what's going on with market conditions or community needs, items like that. Some cities say that a private development over $200,000 in valuation and that it only provides new square footage for commercial, that's considered a project that's eligible for requiring the developer to pay a fee. Also, cities have different definitions of what that fee would be. Is it 1% of the total project valuation? Is it 2%? Typically, in the county, you're looking at a range of anywhere from 0.5% to 2% for this percent set-aside requirement. Some cities, they'll also base the fee on based on square footage, or in this case, valuation. Although lately, the best practice is just to do it for valuation because it's easier to administer from a city staff level. Typical projects that are exempt from the percent for art fee ordinance, things like seismic retrofits and major structural repairs. For instance, if you had to repair your home from an environmental calamity. Other cities have added more exceptions that meet their local need. For instance, if they're trying to promote a historic preservation program, they may waive any type of requirement for historic preservation, or if they're trying to get in a new community, a wellness center, a private wellness center, or a hospital, they may look at waiving the requirement for a building that's going to house, let's say, a nonprofit organization. Also, developer contributions. There are some cities that say that if the 1% was to be given, there's some cities that say, well, let's say if there's a project, anything over $2 million in valuation, they're supposed to put a art installation on site. Other cities say, let's just do an in lieu fee because that way we can get larger pieces of art that are much more visible. So for example, if you have a 1% fee and you have a $2 million project, you're only going to get a $20,000 art installation. And so I'm not sure that's really it's going to give you the most visible or profound artwork. And then finally, some cities set a limit on the amount of in lieu fees required by a developer. For instance, the city of Calabasas sets a cap. So, if let's say it was a developer who was putting a big subdivision together, they cap it at $150,000 that the developer would have to pay for that fee. So again, ordinances countywide, they differ greatly. Our recommendation right now as we start this discussion with private development is that I don't think there's any right way or wrong way to do this ordinance. The good thing about developing an ordinance is it's always subject to amendment depending on how we understand and how we adjust our art program as it evolves. So with that being said, tonight the city manager would like to open again the questions of whether or not the city should impose the art requirement for private development, and then the 3 questions following.
I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the table. It's a lot of extensive research. But it seems to me like there's something that probably wasn't as emphasized. The type of project, the exemption, seems like a lot of the private percentage for art fee for private development is focused on industrial and commercial property. There are some that you listed in here that are for residential, but they're like multifamily. There are some cities that do include single family or additions and renovations, but seems to me, and I didn't see any breakdown here in percentage, seems to me that seems to be a minority of the cities who actually impose on single family, imposing on home additions, that sort of thing. Am I correct?
You're correct, and there's different ways that the exemptions based on cities, how they address it. Most cities will not, most cities will exempt an addition, a remodel if it wasn't adding square footage. But adding square footage then would trigger the requirement if, let's say you're adding 2,000 square feet and that creates the threshold of that $100,000 trigger, then that would go. But again, every city is different. The other note that I'd like to make is most of these cities that do have public art programs, they do have a lot of commercial and industrial land. And so that's where most of the revenues are generated from is new builds. For instance, Pomona, which established their public art program a year before us, their private residential development community wanted more analysis on how much they were going to pay. At the end of the day, they set a threshold of $750,000 for the fee, $750,000 for commercial, industrial, and then any housing subdivision over 10 units or more. So there isn't a precise science to how you set eligible projects.
It seems to me that it's a moving target.
Right.
Because it depends at what point a city is in its evolution.
Correct.
And what's going on. Right now, we're doing a lot of tear downs and new housing.
Right.
Who knows? We may completely redo Las Tunas 10 years from now. So it'd be a different emphasis.
Correct. Right now, most of, in looking at the 165 permits, give or take maybe 5, that were issued in 2013, the majority were brand new residential or remodels. I do have a chart if you just want to see the typical average valuation for those.
Brian, excuse me,
Sure.
but shouldn't we just first decide if we're going
Sure.
to do it and then
Yes.
do the other things?
Yeah, I think it's easier to structure it. Number one, are you interested in a fee? Then, if you are, then what do you want to have encompassed by the fee? And then we can kind of work through that. That would be a good
Okay.
approach.
But there's 2 questions, one having to do with commercial The other having to do
Yeah.
with residential.
Right.
Right, that's a subset.
Yeah.
So I guess the first question we need to address is, do we want to look at a fee? And, so that's the first question we need to address. When we set this art group up, we realized that there had to be some funding source coming to them. Otherwise, it's sort of academic that we have an art program. And so we're now at that point where we need to decide, do we move forward? Then if we decide we want to move forward, then obviously working the details out. And I think we want to try to get through a few levels of the details, at least in general terms here tonight, so staff can go back. One of the concerns, the longer we stall this, there's lots of activity going on in town now. And, if we wait too long, I think we will miss an opportunity or a possible opportunity for this. So anyone have any questions to start? The first question is, should we have a fee?
Well, I
Well,
want
there's
to.
two questions, though.
Yeah.
Should we have a fee for future capital improvements, and should we have a fee for private development projects?
Well, let's first of all, are
You
we
have to take
interested in a
each
fee?
And which one?
Well, let's just say yes, and then we'll go to the next subset.
But that's not one of the questions that they're asking us.
If-
It's broken
I'm
down
sorry.
two ways.
Well, we were actually looking at, should we have a fee for private development? And then we could have a separate question, should we have a fee for public? Because public could be infrastructure, street work, it could be buildings.
Yeah,
It's
they're
a
two whole different areas.
Whole different areas, right.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then that would basically, if you look at it, not to get too far astray, then you're looking at, that's a general fund contribution. So it's
Yes.
sort of a different animal.
I do have another question before I can answer that question for myself. I know there have been, like with the Olson property, with Olson Pride, there have been some funding available, and is that funding sitting in an account ready to be used, and how much do we have in there?
Tracy, do you know, did they pay, they're contributing 50,000 on-site art, and they'll pay up to 150,000. It's based on a formula? Or is it when they pull their and have they made that payment yet?
I think it was so much per.
Was it so much per unit or
when they
upon
when they pull their
issuance of the first
permit.
building permit? Do you happen to know offhand?
Yeah, my-
It will be 150,000.
It's based on the
I
permit.
seem to recall when we were going through the budget
Right.
process that had already been paid.
Right, that's, I guess that's the reason why I asked this question, is that we need to keep in the back of our mind that there is, I mean, going back to your statement, Mayor, that there is money set aside right now for public arts.
Did you want
Yeah.
me to
please.
follow up on that? I don't know how to turn this thing on.
But of that amount, we should remind ourselves that we had some money in the general fund for the Rosemead project, and the council voted to use the Olson money, which I believe was it like $42,000, so that the general fund wouldn't be impacted that. So I think there was already some commitment using the Olson money towards the Rosemead project. That occurred during the budget process, as I recall, so the general fund wouldn't be impacted by that. So I don't know what the total would be.
Yeah, but the total we're going to receive from the Olson project is $150,000. And that, it's my understanding, was just a flat amount that was basically negotiated through the development process. The fees that have been paid so far, they'll pay the fees when they pull the building permits. The building permits have been pulled on the model units only, and that's 4 units, correct? Yeah, so we don't have very much money yet from the Olson project, but we will within the next few months.
Okay, any other questions on that?
I have a question on another matter, though, before we move forward. Brian, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I probably should have asked this beforehand. Do you have any sense of where we get most of our development from? I think I know the answer to this, but I would guess that it would be mostly residential versus commercial.
Yes, you're correct, residential. Most of our, I'm just going to give you a guess, probably 70% of our permit activity was residential last year.
Yeah, I was going to say 85% of our land use is residential, so.
Yeah.
You happen to know the evaluation of that? I mean, in terms of numbers, probably residential got to be a lot more, because even small additions will count as a building permit. But I imagine commercial valuation should be decently high to compensate for some of that.
And actually, on the screen is a cursory rough crunch
Oh,
of
good.
all the permits that were issued last year, which you'll see under the commercial heading. The $1 million was mostly from the the Camellia Square project. And then what I have there is actual average values. So actually, we've made much, much more. That's just an average of what the typical permit valuation was. So, you know, for instance, brand new residential is $382,000. We had 51 new units developed. We had 78 units that went under substantial residential remodel and addition. The $81,000 that's cited there, of that amount, about 30% was over $100,000.
New residential, what does that include?
So that would be if someone was to tear down an existing home and build a brand-new home, and that's really what we're
Is
seeing.
that construction costs only?
That's based, on the permit valuation, or the new subdivisions that you're seeing in the community.
That
like
wouldn't
the ones in the
necessarily
city.
in any way reflect the sales of it, though, because the
Right.
formula in the building code is a lot different.
Okay, are there any other questions before, and we'll just take them as they're written here in front of us here. So the first question is, should the city's future capital improvement projects require a set-aside allocation for public art? If yes, what are considered eligible and exempt projects? And what is the desired art set-aside percentage allocation valuation threshold? So those are two questions. So the first question, I guess there's three questions there. So the first question is, do we want to require on future capital improvement projects a set-aside of some percentage? to
Get
go
an
to
example
public?
of what that would be, a capital improvement
Sure,
project.
it could take a couple different, hit a couple different areas. One would be sort of a building project. We're going to add square footage to a park building or city hall. But on the bigger picture, we do a lot more infrastructure projects, and they are capital improvement projects. However, the question is, if we spend 1.4 million doing slurry seals projects and they're considered capital, even though that's questionably a maintenance project, maybe that's not the best, a sewer line project. Would we want to charge an art fee for a sewer line project? Some do, some don't. Keep in mind, though, a lot of our capital projects are funded by outside sources. So things like gas tax or what we call STPO, which is like state money through Caltrans, MTA, they typically don't allow to use any of that money for art. So one of the things you need to consider is if you're going to impose an art fee on capital projects and apply it to all sorts of projects, but the funding of that project is from an outside agency, then essentially the general fund would have to make that contribution. So if I'll take the extreme example. We have a $20 million Rosemead Boulevard project, and 18 million of it is outside money, and that includes things like gas tax and Prop A and Prop C. You know, would we apply that, say, 1% fee to the whole project, and then the general fund would have to make up 1% of that, which would be $200,000, or do you only apply it to the, you exempt those projects, or do you only apply it to things that the general fund's contribution? So that gets a little trickier because so many of our projects are a result of a successful, grant funding program.
And if
Buildings are an easy one because most of those we're not going to get grants for, unfortunately. But if you're getting into street projects and infrastructure projects or a traffic signal or something where we're getting other monies that can't be used for it, we'd have to decide whether we still wanted to contribute money for an art project.
Okay. I'd just like to make a statement here. I think we probably do want to do this on capital projects, but I think it should be just the building projects, not the typical infrastructure, the streets, the sewers, those type of things where it's more maintenance and sustainability. So, if we did the P3 project, we revamped City Hall, I would say that project would have a public art component to it.
What about Sunny Slope putting new water lines in?
No, I guess what I would propose is that type of infrastructure not you know, that it's providing just the
But
basic.
that's their
infrastructure.
expenditure, not ours.
Yeah, although we all pay for it through our rates.
I would tend to agree. When I was looking over this, you know, my answer to this first question was, you know, I think we should hold ourselves to the same standards or similar to what we do with private, but at the same time, I think if I were to answer yes on this, I would have to really take a close look at what are eligible and exempt projects and really narrow that down, because otherwise we could be setting ourselves up, as our city manager indicated, for a big hit on our general fund, which I don't think anybody would too happy with.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think that was our original intent when we set this whole thing up, was to have a big general fund hit on this. It was intended that, you know,
It's just the opposite.
yeah, that we get grant funding and that we leverage what we have, although we do need some capital to be able to leverage and to get grants and other stuff. Okay, so I've heard, Councilmember, you, any thoughts on?
Well, I am all for, you know, an art component in capital projects. You know, all the public projects that I have worked on, they all have generally a 1% public art component. Although a lot of municipalities, they do have a cap, let's say, but of course some of these municipalities are pretty big. Let's say they do it's generally 1%. So if you have a $200 million construction, they cap it at $1 million, even though it would have worked out 1% to be $2 million. I would say that we probably want to look at the same thing, you know, like Mayor Pro Tem has suggested. We really don't want this to be a major hit on the general funds. So I would think that we probably want to limit, consider limiting, you know, while we can set, let's say, 1%, but we probably want to, let's say, limit it no more than, let's say, $50,000 or something that to our level of scale of revenue that would not be outrageously high.
Of course, that amount would be
But-
$500.
Oh, no, I meant the maximum that we put
Oh,
into
the
our
maximum
project.
amount,
You
so it
know,
would be like
because
a
if you look at
50
a
oh, I
reasonable
see.
amount, and I think we have experienced that in the Rosemead Boulevard project,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you have $5,000, $10,000, that's reasonable to get a decent piece of art put into a project. So,
Or you accumulate them too.
or you can accumulate them too. yes.
There's another way that cities are now dealing with this, with the same concerns that you're
Right.
having, is that instead of imposing, let's say, the 1% on capital projects and an ordinance, cities now will do it administratively, where every year, by resolution, when they're doing their budget, they'll say, you know, we will allocate 1.5% for public art on capital projects. And it just gives cities a little bit more flexibility to make the math work out when they're doing projects that are always constantly changing, especially in the public realm. So that's
Well,
just
that-
another option.
That kind of gets to what I was thinking earlier, and I think to answer part B of this question, which Councilmember you touched upon, and that is the percentage. To me, in my mind, I think this should have some kind of relation on what we want to do in the art world. I mean, you know, what are we going to use this money for? And what are our goals? I mean, I think that has some relationship to what we're looking for as far as raising money for this. If our goal is to spend, you know, $50,000 a year, then of course the percentages would be affected by that. If it's to spend $250,000 a year, then we're looking at something entirely different. So I think it has to have some relation. I guess what I'm saying is I would prefer to start off more on the low side and see where we go with it, because we can always change it at some point in time if it's not meeting our needs, perhaps. But I don't know. Do we have any idea what we want to do? I mean, I don't even know if we're that far along in the process.
We
Or
are
what we're going to spend next year on art?
right now. The only revenues that we'll have be coming in is the $150,000 from the Olson project.
We know we can't spend more than 150 right now, I guess. We're limited to that.
Right. But the thought also when we had presented the annual plan was that we would evaluate what the public art program would look like at mid-year should the ordinance be adopted. So if we knew we were going to get $300,000 in revenues, then we could craft a more viable art program, knowing what our parameters were. So we
So you
grappled
would
with the
rather
same
have the money,
question.
you know what you have to spend, and then, rather than putting together a wish list and then trying to raise the money to do that.
Right, and then on top of that too, just because you get, let's say we get 300,000, the commission would also have to work with staff and the council and recommend every year of the 300,000, how much is actually going to public art? Let's say 70%, and then 10% goes to administrative costs, and then the remaining goes to maintenance. So there are larger policy issues that we're going to have to
Oh,
address
yeah, there's
after the
much more
ordinance.
for you guys to flesh out, there's no
Right.
question about that.
And I think one of the other things we had in mind when we set this up is that the program may depend a large amount on grant funding that they can get. So if there's an opportunity to get funding
You mean grant funding for the art project itself?
for the art project itself,
Yeah.
yes. And that we have enough of a kitty that we can have matching funds, whatever is required for grant funding, that we'd be in a position to leverage our dollars.
Well, I don't know, is grant funding a viable thing with
I would imagine
public art?
these days there isn't a whole lot out there.
And the grant funds that are available for public art, typically through like the National Endowment of Arts or the State Art Board, those are typically granted to programs that have a long track record of public art. We're still in our infant stage, so most likely we're not going to get those type of sizable grants.
So it sounds like we're on our own.
Correct.
For a while.
It's difficult to plan for them, let's just put it that way.
Okay, let me try to move this along. It was thrown out a possibility of 1%, a 1% fee with some type of a cap, and you said 50, and I'll throw out 100.
Well, actually, I would distinguish that by a little bit. I say 1% on our capital project to be spent on art. I don't necessarily mean that asking private development to.
Yeah, I think we're just talking
No,
about
we're talking
right
on
now.
capital
Yeah,
improvement.
We're not
The-
talking
The
about
second
private
question
yet.
will be private.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I think a 1% would be a neat number to look at. Yeah.
But that would include things like routine maintenance.
Well, see,
and-
but that's the second question, is what is eligible and what's exempt?
Correct.
That's
Well-
the next question we have to kind of give some direction on, I believe.
Correct. Typically, most cities will put a threshold, and it all depends on what the city's capital improvement plan is. Our plan here is really more maintenance at this point. If you look at like Pasadena's capital improvement plan, much, much different. That being said, cities don't impose the requirement on street paving. They don't impose it, let's say we did like a big HVAC system rehaul. No one in the public is going to see that, so there's obviously it would be exempt. In our city, it would most likely be if we did a public facility, whether we add to it or we build a new one, or a streetscape project like Rosemead Boulevard. Those are really.
Or Las Tunas.
Or Las Tunas.
Or Las Tunas, or the mortuary property, or the Primrose property, or City Hall, should we get there?
Correct.
Those are all good candidates
Yeah,
for
but it would not
public
be the
art.
bike master plan, it would not be safe routes to schools, it wouldn't be the pavement management program, the sewer repair or upgrade programs,
Or routine maintenance.
or the tree maintenance program or anything like that. Right. So we're pretty much in agreement on that. Are we in agreement on a 1% with the
Okay, yeah.
exemptions that we're talking about?
Okay?
No.
You all right?
No, I'm all right with that.
Okay?
So again, this will be coming back to us in the form of an ordinance, so we'll have a chance to, vet it and have the public comment on it,
Right.
because I guess right now we're not actually open
Do
it
we
for
need to
public
discuss
comments.
the valuation threshold as well? We say 1%, but when is
Right.
that going to kick in?
Correct.
Is it, there should be some threshold, I think.
And it all depends on, again, when we're looking at other cities, All depends on what the capital improvement plan is. I don't know what you're comfortable with, and mostly it's because we don't know what the grant funding's coming into the city right now. General rule of thumb is that it's $2 million triggers that in some cities, although in my personal belief, I think that's a little low. I may increase the threshold to maybe 5 million, but again, obviously it's the council's call, and I'm not sure if the city
And
manager
this
has
is for
any
the
thoughts
capital
of that.
improvement, so you would say anything over 5 million would trigger this?
That's a
fee?
suggestion.
I know, but
We would
anything-
have to look at our pending grant revenues, but
Okay, I'm a little lost. 5 million on what?
5 million, like, so a $5 million
Construction costs.
project.
Everybody's talking at the same time. I didn't hear.
Yeah. So like, so this requirement would trigger on a project that's worth $5 million, or $2 million, or,
Whatever we decide.
right.
We don't have a lot of $5 million projects.
I was gonna say.
That would be my only concern. If that, for a city that does larger projects, that might be reasonable. That's a kind of a high starting point.
And we, right off the top, exempt monies that were obtained, that can't be counted, like the Rosemary project. We couldn't count
Yeah,
18 million.
18 million
that.
of it is grant
So
funding.
really, that would be a $2 million project, really.
Right.
And if we had a $5 million threshold, it wouldn't have triggered anything.
So I'm not sure what would be left, because I can't imagine even if, with the Las Tunas project, we're certainly, anticipating a significant, a majority of the funding from grant funding with the call for projects and things. So, you'd have, I'm not sure how much we generate from that element if we had that high of a number.
I believe even large municipalities like LA County, LA City, I don't think they have actually a dollar limit. In other words, if you do a $200,000 improvement project, they would still set aside 1%.
So they don't have a floor. Their floor is zero.
Their floor is zero, yes.
And anything that's eligible above
Yeah.
that, then there's a cap.
Right. Yeah, anything like more than $1 million, LA County would cap it.
Well,
Is that the cap you're talking about, the
Yeah,
50
that's the
grand?
cap.
Yeah, but on
Yeah.
our graph here, it shows that Los Angeles exempts projects with total value of all construction work at 500,000 or less. So they started, it has to be over 500,000, so they do have a amount.
But I think it is that refers to the private development. So
Are
two
you sure?
situations, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
It doesn't
Unless
really
they
say
change
on
the
our-
rules.
It doesn't say in our graph whether, because they have both private and public.
Right.
And the exemptions that were given don't differentiate between a private or public development.
Well, I think it says public 1% of all CIPs and commercial industrial projects exceeding 500,000.
Right. So they actually, in other words, LA City and as well LA County, we actually have high standard for the government. So it's 1% for all government work. And then private development, if you exceed 500K, then you're subject to the 1%.
Because they have so many massive, like a downtown project where a new hotel there could be a $500 million project. So if you had a $200,000 project, you wouldn't pay anything. But once you exceed the 500,000, so the scale is just so different for them. If we had a high threshold to kick in on commercial industrial, we would have very, very little fees. But there are certain things you could exempt, like interior improvements and things of that sort, where someone's just someone puts in a sprinkler system or redoes the tenant improvements, but it still requires a building permit. Maybe those are things you would not want to cover. But that's private side.
But what they do is, that even if a small project, they set aside that money to go into the art fund bank, so to speak. And then the either board of supervisor or the LA City Council will decide when to use and what to use it on.
It operates much like the Quimby Fund. You
Yeah,
pay your Quimby fees,
absolutely.
they go into a fund, and there's criteria of how they have to be spent, where they can be spent, things like that.
Okay, right now, we're talking about city capital projects.
City capital projects.
Okay, and I've heard the number 1% thrown out.
That's my
Okay,
suggestion.
everybody comfortable with going in the 1% direction?
I am.
Okay, then the question is whether there should be a bottom threshold or a top threshold. And I guess you're saying, I guess we also have said that the maintenance projects are not, they're exempt. that we're basically into the new building construction projects would be required. Should there be a floor to that and a top to that?
Looking at the graph, it appears that many of the cities that are similar to us in size run anywhere between $250,000 to $500,000 big starting point as far as when this fee would kick in. In dealing with commercial.
And are we all
No, we're-
defining maintenance the
No,
same way?
we're talking about city projects.
Well, I'm about
at this
city
point.
projects, yeah.
Let's just stay on the city
All right, yeah,
projects and
yeah,
wrap that up.
Yeah, in answer to your question, Councilman, it's really difficult to say because this is just a snapshot. Their ordinances are, in some cases, dozens and dozens of pages, so we can't really give you a good answer at this point, like how they would define maintenance versus how we may be
Well,
defining.
that's why I'm throwing it out. so
Yeah,
that
we'll
we
have
can-
to basically take our best shot at it and do more detail and bring that back for you and look at, the exemptions that, or the things that are not included when it comes to public projects, as we will for private projects as well.
Okay, so,
When the phone companies come in and want to put up a tower, what is that?
There was
Is
one,
that a
the
maintenance
value,
thing?
well,
No,
That's
I wouldn't-
commercial development.
yeah.
I'm not sure that would be exempt, other than they have different exemptions under the law as a utility, so I don't know if we would have, if they are required to get a building permit or not. Do you know, Michael, if they have to get a building
Yes.
permit for a cell tower?
Yes.
Okay, so then they probably would have to pay for that.
That's why I'm throwing it out. I'm sure there's all kinds of
There's a lot of
variables.
nuances in
Yeah.
these things.
Okay, so let's stay on city capital projects. We got the 1%. We're talking about a threshold, possibly a $250,000 threshold, that if you're below that, it doesn't trigger anything? Or do we want to not have a bottom threshold and collect small pieces? I mean, we're not going to have very many projects. I mean, we're looking at the P3 maybe. If we do some park expansion or something, there could be something there.
Pretty minimal.
Yeah.
I guess the 250 would be something like remodeling, not that we are going to do it again, remodeling the council chamber or something like that. And
Okay.
whether or not we set aside money for an art project.
Well, let me throw out
I
that
think
we
it has
that
to
we
be at a
have no
level where
threshold.
it's going to do something. If we put it too high, we're never going to even reach it. I mean, not in the projects we have.
Yeah. Well,
It'd be just a
part of the
point.
philosophy, I think, behind it is rather than trying to get money, budget money for a large project, is that we, it's kind of like savings account. Every project, we set aside a little bit of money. So we always consider public art as part of our CIP, capital improvement projects. So even if you do a restroom remodel, you set aside that, let's say that's $500, you just put that in the bank, and the next one may be 5,000, and then you slowly accumulate enough that we can do a public art project. At least that's the philosophy behind no bottom,
Okay.
no floor.
Okay, so let me float the concept of no bottom.
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, everybody, Fernando, as you're leaving, no bottom threshold? No. Okay? Okay. With that, let's take a 5 minutes break.
Okay.
Probably was going to take longer.
Yes. Grant money is, I know, great, but bottom, oh. You guys don't get good However, unless, but we can say that your offside is
without a threshold, I'm going to be real, that's probably the best way.
Because all the other government agencies are exempt.
I know. I thought about it
State,
earlier.
county.
I think for us, it's going to be good.
This is a 2-minute warning, so we got another 2 minutes.
It all adds up. No. Residential. What if a guy comes in and decides to start buying up full blocks of downtown to put in big stuff? Oh, yeah, I read that too.
Got all over me, huh? What's the deal? I was the only guy that listened to him, and now he attacks me.
Well, and he says it wasn't him you were talking
Oh,
to.
it was him.
It was him.
Yeah, I know.
Don't you think he kind of looks a bit like, that director, what's his name? No, not Roman Polanski.
No, he looks like the cop that used to have the sucker in his mouth all the time. Kojak.
Telly Savalas.
Telly Savalas.
He's dead.
Telly Savalas is dead.
Huh?
He's dead.
Yeah, I said he needs, if he had the bushy eyebrows, he could be Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, that's true.
I was just gonna say that.
Oh, I didn't want to say that.
That made him feel bad. We're telling him he looks like some director, and Marilyn says he looks like the guy in the Magic Mountain.
Yeah, because I was supposed to let him know about the tour, and he said he might come back this morning. Because I worked on Paul Justice, one of my projects.
They have any people there?
So I'm trying to, there are a few people I wanted to take through the building, and Mark actually was one of them, Persicle. And so I mentioned to Jeffrey, and Jeffrey said he might come back this one, I don't know. So I'll let him know when. So email that. If you want to ask him, that's fine. Ask him first if you want. But I already talked to him.
Okay, we are back in session. We just concluded before the break that we were looking at a 1% fee with no cap. And the other question is there an upper cap, or we just leave it as it is? I don't think we're looking at super major projects in this city, so just leave it that way. Okay.
We're exempting the general infrastructure projects like streets and roads and things of that sort.
So it's basically buildings, new something.
Right.
Construction.
Yeah, new construction.
Oh, wait a minute. Would you exempt a street like the one Olson's putting in?
No, they'll fall under the second one. That's private development.
Okay.
Okay, so let's address the second question. Should the city impose a percent for art requirement on private development? And if yes, what are considered eligible and exempt projects? And what is the desired art set-aside percentage allocation? All right, since 85% of our city's residential, most of the action's going to be in the residential area. Do we consider what we did on our own projects, look at the 1%? Let me just throw some thoughts out, that we look at the 1%, that we have a bottom line cap, and I'll throw out 50,000, so if you got small projects, I think we're looking at remodels and stuff like that, it doesn't trigger it. If it's adding new square footage, could be another requirement.
You have to exempt natural disaster issues.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. The remodel, don't we still have the deal that if you leave a wall up,
That's a different issue.
and if that
Yeah.
reaches $300,000 worth, do we exempt it? That's a different issue?
Yeah, that's a building issue in terms of some of the requirements that kick in for earthquake and, like, I don't know what we do here, but some cities, for example, require sprinklers on remodels over a certain size. But there's still the valuation still applies. There's some belief that the assessor's office doesn't reassess on certain types of projects, but the building permit is still the building permit based on the value that you construct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's independent of whether the assessor assesses that as a new building, or it might exempt them from certain, building code standards.
Yeah, there's a classic one going on right now. It's on Ensenada, just south of Las Tunas. There's a big two-story one. They tore it down until there were just a couple 2x4s still standing, and
Oh, I've
now
seen
it's
it.
starting to be rebuilt again. So I'm sure they work the system on that
So
one.
would that be exempt from the 1%?
No,
No.
because they're still taking a building permit that
Yeah.
they have to pay a fee for that.
Oh, okay, I thought
They
you were
would-
saying the opposite.
Well,
Yeah, they wouldn't be required to meet some other conditions.
It depends if you exempt residential construction totally. For example, a lot of the cities only consider commercial, industrial, and multifamily, which in the construction world is really commercial construction, even though it's residential. People do live there, but it's really a commercial investment.
The usage is residential, but
Right, you're right. The
investment-
multifamily, meaning the 4-unit condo. A lot of the projects that we do, you see, they tear down a couple of houses or one house and put up 4 or 5. I would surmise that probably should be considered like commercial industrial investments. Now, whether or not we consider the people who did it down to the one wall, one stud, if it's single family, should we consider that? I think that's a different question. I would suggest we may look at perhaps single family under a certain valuation should be exempt.
Should be what?
Should be exempt from an RP. I think the question I have really is, when you have a capital improvement project, back to what we just talked about before, the public art generally is right there in front or next to it or associated with the purpose of the building. Let's say if a city hall, you may have a fountain, you may have a sculpture, you have something that you can directly associate the benefit of that public art to that fee that you're collecting. But single family, I'm not so sure I see the nexus there. I mean, you're putting something 10 blocks away because you collect a fee, whereas the homeowner, what I actually do see that as an additional value to
What's
me.
Arcadia doing with those monsters?
Don't we somewhat do
They don't
that,
have a
though,
public
with our lighting assessment district, where you get that value,
Yeah,
even
Arcadia's
if
not
you're
on our
5
list.
blocks away?
On residential?
I think,
Or the benefit assessment, that's what that is.
yeah. So that would be, I think I will at least throw that out for discussion.
Okay, so there's two options here. One is that we can allow it to be for the individual residential. The other one that it be, well, a subdivision, it'd be 4 or more units.
4 or more
Would be
units,
one option of doing that.
Right. I think a lot of the ones that in the staff report are 4 or more units. A lot of the examples are 4 or more.
Could we not do 4 or more units, but then a single-family residence? Because if you look at some of the single-family homes that are going in, they are 5,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet. I mean, that's $1 million to $2 million home. That 1% seems pretty reasonable, because most of those homes are being sold by developers.
Well, but there are also people that build homes for themselves.
I would, well, I'm not in
I mean,
the,
including,
So to me, the more fundamental question is, with the public art program, we're obviously adding value to the city
Well, maybe
and to
so.
everybody that lives in the
Maybe
city. I
we
mean,
should
that's the premise of what we're trying to do. So
Yeah.
then who should help pay for that?
right.
I mean, because everybody benefits. I mean, you're not selling $1 million homes in a community that's run down that doesn't have some oomph to it. And that's what we're trying to provide here for
Yeah, I
our
think that's a good
city.
point.
But I also think that we need to be a little bit.
It's not gonna add that much to the building costs.
No, but I also want to think about this, not consider it in isolation, because there are other things we're planning on. For example, I definitely would like to see something to be done about our pavement, because a residential street at sea or worse in some cases, something has to be done, so there has to be some means of raising funds, and that's going to impact everyone. I want to keep that, so in the back of our mind when we make this a decision like this. Or maybe
Well,
there's
Isn't
a
that one area where we're looking at grants also?
right.
then?
So I would suggest if we were going to do ask the new residential property to pay for it, then we may have to have a different percentage, perhaps, than multifamily, than commercial, industrial. Maybe 0.25%, and something that
For what, residential?
yeah,
for
and
pure
above a certain
residential.
threshold, yeah.
Well, I think you keep it at 1% and then work on your thresholds, I think, because otherwise, I mean, it's going to be a negligible amount.
1% is actually quite a bit, if you really think about it.
Well, let's say if the threshold's $50,000, 1% of that is what, $50? Come on, that's not a lot of money. 500?
500,
All right.
yeah.
That's what
I wasn't a math major, so.
Yeah.
500, still not a lot. I don't.
Okay, let's move this along.
Yeah.
Are we interested in a percent for art fee for private development, and a figure of 1% has been thrown out? Are we comfortable with that? And then we need to look at the threshold. If the answer to that is yes, then we look at the thresholds that we deal with.
I'm yes.
Makes me a little nervous, but I think it can work.
Personally, I'm not supportive of that. I think the line should be drawn between commercial properties and versus private development, residential, especially single family.
Okay, so what would you propose then as a counter to that?
Well, 4 unit or above, commercial and industrial. Those are one subject to the art percentage for art. Single family is exempt.
So if I come in and I tear down an existing home and I build a $1.5 million home, I'm exempt?
Well, don't forget how much you'll be paying to the city and to the school district as well when you build a home like that. So you'll be paying a lot of money.
How about a compromise, 0.5% on residential, 1% on 4 or more?
I still have an issue with that. I mean, to me, single family is pretty sacred to me, and I always fight for single family homes.
Okay, let me float another alternative, which you said that the 1% for 4 or more, 0.5% for residential, but some threshold, that basically, if I'm remodeling my house or if I'm adding a family room, the threshold is high enough where I don't get captured.
Oh, yeah.
But if I'm coming in and I'm tearing it down, I'm going to build I'm getting rid of a 1,400
An
square foot
existing.
house and putting in a 4,000 square foot house, that we somehow capture that
With a 0.5%.
with a 0.5%, whatever that limit would be. $100,000, I don't know what a good
You
threshold
wanna-
is.
So your 4,000s, or using your example, would be size of the building, perhaps valuation of the building, of the construction?
Yeah, it'd have to be on valuation, I think, and not necessarily size. Otherwise, it'd be hard to, I think we have to have one standard method of doing this.
There's 2 homes being built on Olive. I believe it's Dexter Development. And I know that was a huge lot, but it was subdivided and they're putting 2 single-family homes. I believe they're 4,000 square feet. Would you know offhand? And one is, speaking to the developer, he said it's going to be about $2 million, and the other one, maybe they're looking at about 1.7 to sell on.
Where's it?
On Olive, east of Baldwin.
I'm not familiar with those specifically that you're talking about. I can say in general, as part of this report, I was helping Brian look through the building permits that we've gotten over the last couple of years, and most of the square footages that we're seeing are in the range of between 3,500 to 5,000 square feet is mostly what we're seeing. The building permit, the valuation data is hard to compare with as Mr. Penman pointed out, with what a house sells for. Because it's just strictly the valuation that this would be based on is just a mathematical formula that's in the building code that every city does the same way, and it's just based on the square footage of the project. So the building code doesn't care if you're putting in marble countertops or Formica countertops. It just cares this is how big the project is, and based on the math, this is what the valuation is for the purposes of, really the purpose of the valuation is determining what the permit fee and the plan check fee is. That's the main purpose of it. So it's not necessarily tied to what the sale price is or what the property value is or what the assessor is going to assess it at. It's really just a value for determining what the permit and plan check fees are going to be. So it's difficult to make a correlation between that and what the house is going to sell for or what the house is really worth.
How often do they look at that? Does it fluctuate yearly or?
Yes.
The valuation under the building
Yes.
code, I believe is it adjusted based on
I think it gets adjusted every year. Yeah.
Yes, and then the building code is readopted every 4 years.
3 years.
3 years. So the formulas are looked at every time the building code is updated, but then in between that, they're adjusted annually based on the construction price index or one of those indexes.
I believe also for two-story homes in our city, we cap it at 3,500 square feet. You can go over that if it's a single story. So, sorry.
I believe that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask a question, Michael, on, the dollar value as you calculate this. If we're looking for a triggering threshold, and let me just throw out $100,000. I mean, does that, if that number that you come up with, 100,000, are we getting only one or two a year, or are we capturing everybody, or is that,
Let me ask Mr. Hayworth if he has do you have the full valuation list, or do you just have the averages? 100,000 is going to be less than.
By the way, that's just average value.
Some higher, some lower.
Yeah, let me take a look at the full list just to make sure that the blue is the new construction, right?
These are condos.
Those are condos.
27 square feet is for 43.
Yeah, so let me give you some examples. For new house construction, for building code valuations, most of them are in the high 3s to low 5s as far as building code valuation goes. If you're looking at like remodels, let's see, here's one. For example, adding a bathroom and a family room is $80,000. Bed, bath, and family room remodel is $80,000. Adding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom is $109,000, and adding 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom is $122,000. So if you set it, for example, at $100,000, you'd be picking up a lot of the of the remodels where people are adding a bed and a bath or maybe 2 bedrooms, that would be around the threshold of where you'd be picking up, or where people are doing substantial remodels to existing square footage but not adding square footage. If you picked 100,000, that would be around the threshold where you'd be starting to pick up those substantial remodels or additions.
Okay, so if we went a little bit higher, you know, so the people remodeling, the people that substantially doing something, if we put a $200,000 threshold, do we start to eliminate the ability to capture any funds?
Well, I think we'd probably have to go back and run some numbers to give you a better idea. But I think a lot of I think we'd have to look. I mean, we do, frankly, we have a lot of construction of new homes going on. So we do still capture, I mean, when you're looking at a lot of new homes with permit valuations in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, I mean, we're still going to pick up, you know, if those are the only ones we're capturing, we're still going to be capturing, you know, a bit of revenue from those. But I think we would need to go back and run those numbers to bring some better information back to you as to what those numbers would be.
Michael, is there any way you could do something, for instance, when you get a loan on a owner-occupied, you know, home or construction loan and you're going to live in it, your interest rate is lower. Could you possibly not impose any fee for people who who build a single-family home and to live in it versus a developer who builds a single-family home to sell it for profit?
Be hard to
It would-
monitor, I think.
Well, I'm wondering.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in theory we could do that. I think it would be difficult to.
Police.
I think it would be difficult to
Too many ways
police
around
that,
it.
and I think we'd probably end up with a lot of people trying to game the system to get around it. And I think in theory it's possible. You know, pending discussion with the city attorney just to make sure that we could legally do that. I think in theory we could do it, but I think it would be very difficult in reality to enforce it.
Because I think something like that would alleviate council members' concern that a person who wants to do a huge remodel, double the size of their home and live in it, they're not making a profit. They're investing for themselves in the community. But Mr. Vale?
Well, wouldn't they, what do you mean they're not making a profit? If they remodel their home?
Well, I mean, they
the
are, but
value's
they're.
gonna go up substantially.
Could you do where they, I mean, I don't know how you would do it.
You can't tap into that value, though. I mean,
And you don't know what their intent is.
If you
Yeah.
sell it or you take a home equity loan, you can tap into it.
That's true.
People do that
I
all the
suppose.
time.
Okay, I'm stalling just slightly here. Our city manager went and grabbed some information. He's digesting it real quick here.
Well, I think the one thing I wanted to point out is, and I think Michael, you know, did a very good job of explaining it, simply because a house sells for $2 million doesn't mean that's the permit value. And because I was curious about some of the things that our neighbor was doing, and I don't know how familiar you are, but there's a house on Fallen Leaf, which is one of the most prestigious areas in Arcadia, with 6 bedrooms, 7 baths, living room, walk kitchen, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The valuation's 1.4, but that house will probably sell for $3 million minimum. So I think the point that Michael's making, the valuation has there's no correlation between what that house will sell for, because as Michael said, the building code doesn't look at finishes. You could have Formica, you could have the most expensive cabinetry. The code doesn't look at that. So, you know, it's not to say it's not more expensive, they won't pay more, of course they will, but there's no relation between the sale of that house and what the building permit value is, because it's a standard formula based on sizes and things of that sort, not the finishes, not the quality, you know, not the architecture, you know, things like that. So I just want to clarify, it would still be a hefty fee, no question, but if a house was a $3 million house in sales, if a house was valued at 3 million, it's probably about a $5 million house because it's different than what the building code requires.
Do we know how much building permit total value we issue for residential buildings?
Well, Brian, what was the chart that you had there? Maybe you could pull that up again. It gave some statistics.
If it's average, maybe multiply that out.
So we had 51 permits, right? For new,
So you, also your report says you think it will yield $280,000 a year if you collect 1% from all construction?
The report, yes, but we also, that was just an estimate, we also adjusted out the Gateway project, because that's, Camellia Square, because it's not an anomaly. But again, we're very liberal with that estimate, because we didn't know
Well,
what the price.
I would like to throw out there, how much money do we really need for public art in a year? 200,000 seems like a pretty high number.
That's what I asked an hour ago.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry, just real quick, just based
But-
on new residential, at a 1%, you would generate $194,820.
Right.
About 195 based on last year's permit. Just on new residential.
So when we say 1% and all residential, I mean, do we really want to spend that kind of money on public art? I'm sure they can spend it, that spending is not a problem. And,
If you give it to them, they're going to spend it.
oh yeah,
I wonder if we should, to me, I'm looking at these graphs, and I'm wondering if we should look at it from, maybe take another approach at it. It seems to me that when we're dealing with this area, this private development, we're really looking at three categories: commercial, industrial, new construction of residential, and then remodels of existing. Those are the three main categories, and I think if we can, and we'll have to, I think we can do something with each of those, and of course, that would be our task, is say, okay, what's going to be, let's say, for example, the fee and the threshold on commercial, that's probably going to be different from perhaps new construction, and what's going to be the threshold there. It seems like many of the cities, as you mentioned earlier, don't look at the single-family homes, but more the 4 units or more, which were the big projects. And then the remodels of the existing buildings, I think it's, as you indicated earlier, I think it's maybe a little inequitable for the homeowner who's going to do a simple remodel on their home to really hit them with an additional fee, because we had those fee issues come up on some other thing that we were doing months ago, and we got some flack from the local real estate community and how much more difficult it'll be to sell a home, whatever. But I think what we have to be mindful is, I think Councilmember Viscara says, what about the big ones where they just leave, wall up, and all of a sudden a remodel becomes basically new construction of 300,000. I think we can't ignore those. So to me, I think if we break it down into those three categories and then develop some parameters as to each one of those, it might be simpler than just trying to find one solution to all of them.
Just so I'm clear, the 4 or more are in the commercial, right?
Yeah, commercial, industrial, what we're looking at this point is 4 or more,
No, that's what-
1%.
That would be residential, 4 more units.
Well, which is it?
But it's commercial, it's 4 residential units, but it's basically
a commercial
being
development.
done by a commercial developers.
So it's in the commercial category.
Well,
That's what I think that. the-
That's what
Is
you're
it in the
calling it.
commercial category up on your chart?
I don't think, it doesn't appear to me that cities are looking at it that way. They're not saying that a 4-unit, let's say a 4-unit apartment building is a commercial.
Correct.
That's not what, they don't consider that a commercial. They say commercial, industrial, and residential of 4 or more units. Those are separate categories.
Okay,
Just because it's 4 more units doesn't make all of a sudden it
Well, we're
becomes a commercial.
surmising that, but I mean, you have a stat up there. What the hell's in this?
Yeah, let me suggest that the 3 that you mentioned, commercial, industrial, and the 4 or more residential, that we treat them all the same.
You can do that.
I mean, that's sort of lumping,
Well, that's what he's trying to get away from.
Well, no, I
And
think,
that's why I was suggesting the 0.5% on the
are you
residential.
trying to get away from that? If industrial, commercial, and 4 or more residential, those are at 1%, and then we take the other single-family residential and address that separate. Are you comfortable with that?
I'm actually more comfortable with 0.5%.
For which one?
For what we just, well, for commercial, industrial, and multifamily, 4 unit or above.
why would you want to say residential is commercial? Why would you even want to go there?
No, I meant
don't
4
understand.
units or above,
I'm not asking
residential.
you why, I'm just saying, why as a body would we want to say
Uh-huh.
that residential is commercial?
Well,
Residential is residential,
Because
commercial is commercial.
It's being built for sale. It's not being built to live in. It isn't you building it. It's some guy coming in, putting in 4 units, and he's gonna sell it to 4 separate parties.
Yeah, but it's still
So that-
residential, somebody's going to live there.
Well,
He may
it's
not.
still commercial. He's doing it to make
Well-
money.
I think that's just clouding the issue a little bit.
Well,
But how
to
do we
clear,
monitor that? How do you know he's not going to put 4 family members in each one?
well, let's treat them all separate. If we go commercial, industrial, are we all comfortable at 1%?
Yes, I thought there were 4 yeses some time ago.
Okay? And then if we go, then we go to residential. We have the 4 or more residential at some threshold, and you're saying 0.5%? With some, well, there wouldn't be a threshold at that point. If it's 4 or more, it's the 0.5%. Can everybody live with that?
So any new construction of 3 units or more is going to be exempt from this?
4 or more.
No, that's when it'll
He's-
kick in.
he's
for-
couching
I'm-
it differently.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
if somebody wants to build a residential of 3 units or less, they're going to be exempt from this art fee. That's what you're basically saying.
Yes.
Okay. So that would include your single-family homes, a duplex, something, and we're talking new construction. Somebody has an empty lot, if there are any in Temple City, and they would put up,
We keep making empty.
Or it's a tear down.
yeah, tear down, I suppose.
Okay.
So that would be one category.
Okay, that's one category. Then what I'm getting is the questioning whether we want to go single-family residential at all, or just leave them alone at this point. See what we develops out of this, to have staff go back with those guidelines and come back with some projection, what that might give us.
No, I
I'm
think
comfortable with leaving single-family homes alone.
that would be fair to at least for our next consideration for
We
staff
may
to
be
come back with
losing
some
a big source
projections.
of income, but if it develops and it becomes an issue, we
I don't
can
think it'll ever
change
be
it.
big.
Yeah. Okay, are we comfortable with that?
Excuse me, Mayor, what was the 4 more multifamily was what fee?
That was the 0.5%?
0.5%.
0.5%, okay.
0.5%? So it's 1%
I
for
think it should be 1%.
commercial, industrial?
Well, perhaps staff can come back with 0.5%, 1%, see where
We
we
can run
are.
the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, come back with,
Because
Compromise
the
and make it
compromise is,
three-quarter.
the compromise is we're not doing it on single-family homes.
Right, yeah.
And as you said, these 4 are more of a commercial, and somebody's gonna be making money on them. So,
Of course, we could muddy the water a little more. Why is 4 a magic number? Why not 3?
I don't know,
Why not 2?
people seem to be taking 4 all the time. I don't know why it is, but it
it's
is.
just part of the subdivision code.
Maybe that's just the way they do
Yeah,
things.
so that is really where the line is.
Wasn't it 5 or more is a subdivision, 4 is a parcel map?
There are some that have 5.
If you have 4 or fewer, you don't have to have a parcelization.
when we
If you have
need it.
5 or more, you have to have
So
a
4?
subdivision map.
Yeah.
Yeah, some cities tie it into
Yeah,
the 5.
but for our
units or more.
purposes, that's a non-issue.
No, I don't know, not necessarily. Mayor, I did want to clarify, we've said a lot that you're not going to impose something on single-family homes, but you are going to impose it on single-family homes when it's 4 or more in the development, correct?
Yes.
And an apartment or a condo development is also included in that same category.
I would, yeah.
That's
Yes.
correct. And that's at the 0.5%.
Right. Well.
We'll
let's
find
have-
it. We'll see.
Let's
We'll
give
see.
us a gap here.
Give us an
5% and
analysis
1%.
between 0.5 and 1%, what it looks like that may be.
And then the last category would be the remodels, because that's a big issue. People do remodel a lot. You know, where do we want that threshold to be, or do we want a fee that covers remodels? And my inclination would be, you know, we're getting a lot of these so-called remodels where they leave a wall up, and it really essentially is a new building, new construction to me. But obviously, I don't know if it qualifies as a remodel.
Well, if you're going to
somehow.
exempt single family, it's a
How
moot
can
point.
you impose?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, well,
What difference would it make?
yeah, you got a point there, because it,
They're doing it for different reasons, for tax reasons, but if you're going to exempt new single family, they could leave one wall up and it's still going to be exempt because it's still single family.
yeah, single family.
If you had it the other way, then you would want to consider how you caught those, but if you're going to exempt all single family, it doesn't really matter.
Why don't we have staff come back,
We'll run some numbers.
some numbers, bring those back to us at that point?
Okay.
Okay. I think that was the direction we were looking for, wasn't it?
Right, we don't want to go into the administrative details
Right, right.
tonight.
Okay, so everybody on board with that? We're doing the 1% on city projects that are new builds, not maintenance. We're doing 1% commercial, industrial. We're doing 0.5% on 4 or more units, and we're doing nothing with the, just strictly residential at this point.
And did we define 4 or more units? Is it commercial or is it residential?
It's residential.
It's residential, 4 or
Okay.
more residential, yes. Okay?
Do you need certain direction, I thought, on the exempt projects for this as well?
Not necessarily. When we come back with the financial scenarios, we can give you some further examples. I think one discussion is going to be whether or not you want to exempt affordable units or income-restricted units.
Senior housing.
Right.
Right. And those, and even the affordable units are unique because developers can select certain number of
Right.
fee waivers exemptions themselves as part of that process. So we should consider that because in all likelihood, there could be a whole slew of fee waivers for a truly affordable project.
Right.
So we'll research that, and you may
Okay.
just want to build it into it anyway.
Okay?
I had a question about not preschools, it was suggested exemption for childcare facilities. And I was wondering if preschools fall under that category.
We could investigate that further. How we read it was a nonprofit was operating a childcare facility.
Okay.
But if it's a for-profit,
That would be a different.
that would be different.
Right.
Situation.
Okay, I think we moved forward substantially here. You know, we've talked about nudging this thing forward. I think we've nudged it, giving staff some direction on how to come back with something at this point. Okay? Very good. Everybody nodding their head with what we've got? I don't think we did a formal vote on it, but we're all nodding our heads. Okay, we'll move on to item 11, which is communication. There is none.
Mayor, I'm sorry, you do need to ask for public comment on this item.
Okay, public comment at this side. I was thinking we would have public comment once we brought the ordinance back, but we can open it for public comment? That too. Okay. Anyone from the public care to comment on all this deliberation that's gone on here?
Jerry.
And give us your magical words of wisdom on how to solve this thing. Okay, going once, going twice. We will close the public comment period, seeing there were none. Okay, item 11, communication, there is none. Item 12, update from the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple brief items. Campapalooza. As a reminder, Live Oak Park will be partly occupied this Friday evening to Saturday morning. The city is hosting its annual Campapalooza family campout. The event is sold out, but we encourage those interested to keep an eye out next year. Relay for Life. The Relay for Life is next weekend at Temple City High School. The annual event raises awareness and dollars for cancer prevention and research. The event kicks off on Saturday, July 26th at 9 a.m. and runs until 9 a.m. the following day. To learn more or to contribute, visit www.relayforlife.org, Temple City, Cal. Summer concerts, Beats and Eats, the popular summer concert series continues every Wednesday evening at the Performing Arts Pavilion in Temple City Park on July 30th. Join us for a special Beats and Eats event featuring food trucks and live country music by Brian Lynn Jones and the Misfit Cowboys. Food trucks start serving at 5:30 p.m. with the concert beginning at 7. For more information, call the Parks and Rec Department at 626-285-2171, extension 2360. And that's it for tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question to the city attorney? In the previous item, agenda item for the art fee, do we actually need to make a formal motion, or is that enough as a direction?
No, you did not need to make a formal motion. You're just giving direction, although that is considered an action for the purpose of the Brown Act.
Okay.
Which is why we had to have ask for public comment.
I see.
So you don't need to give a formal motion.
All right, thank you.
Okay, item 13 on the agenda, council reports regarding ad hoc or standing committee meetings. Anybody have any reports?
I have one.
Okay.
I attended the chamber meeting last night, and through discussions, one of the items that came up was to propose a joint meeting with the council and the executive board, similar to what we do with the school district. And one of the reasons was to kind of get some clarification. I know our past city manager was working with the chamber and gave them some ideas of what their work plan should be. And there's still some questions as to what the chamber's role is and what the city's role is in, some of the things that are in the work plan. So I suggested that if the council would like to get together, that it might be a way to come together and at least understand what is going on. I think individually, we probably all spoke to the past city manager regarding what the expectations were, but we never discussed it openly and in public and as a council. So I think it was important, and I wanted to see if you would all be in agreement, and then I will get back to them. And possibly the date, they said, let's wait until after the new city manager was seated, and it would be a good time for everybody to come together and be on the same page.
Okay, anybody have any objection to that?
No?
Okay, so, good.
One more meeting.
Let's plan that. Yeah, we've got, this will be the third joint meeting we're looking at. We're looking at one with the school district board. We're looking at doing one with the Public Arts Commission, and then we're looking at doing this one. So there's three that we're trying to coordinate.
Just for your information, we are planning on the August 5th meeting in 3 weeks to bring the chamber contract back, because right now it's an annual contract, so we need to at least have something in place that can obviously be modified or at that time or at a later date. But right now, we're working on another year's, an extension, if you will, or something similar to what you've approved in the past, which probably should suffice now until you have your study session. But it does obviously address the chamber's roles and responsibilities and the relationship with the city. So-
And they were in agreement. They knew of that August 5th date and said, as long as we know that we're going to have something, it can be modified or adjusted, but at least we'd have a guideline.
Okay?
So that's all on
Okay.
reports.
Anybody else have any reports under the ad hoc or standing
I'm just
committees or
wondering where
liaisons?
what is it, the traffic study we've been waiting for
Las Tunas?
on Las Tunas?
My understanding was towards the end of August is when it's due.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to item 14, council item separate from the city managers, a regular agenda. Councilmember Sternquist.
A couple of things from the Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District. They are having a challenge, a 18-city challenge, and actually today was the final day that you could call, and I just got the information actually today from Steve Scazzillo, and I believe it was mailed out sometime in June to Tracy, but it was directed at Tracy, but there was a lot going on, so I don't know if maybe...
That's the challenge with the cities? Yeah, it
Yes.
came over to my desk.
Oh, yours, okay, it's addressed to you. But anyway, so I had seen him, and Steve Scazzillo from the Star News had asked if we were participating. So I reached out to him, and he gave me the information, and actually found out today was the last day.
Today was the last day?
That we could let them know. So I told them that we wanted to know more about it, and the gal in charge, is going to come out in our next council meeting. She's going to try and get together tomorrow with you, Peggy, to see about getting on the agenda, and then she'll go ahead and put our name down, and if we're not interested, then
Yeah, I
Challenge
do, I have
to
to
do what?
confess.
Well,
I
it's-
have the information through budget and everything, I didn't spend time on it, but we can discuss it tomorrow's staff meeting, because
Sure.
I do
Well,
have the information, I just haven't had a chance
It's
to go through it.
18 cities, and it actually would start today, but we would just be a little bit late if we decided to do it. And there's actually 12 qualifiers that you can choose from. One is mandatory, and I can give you the information, don't have to go through all
Just
of
to
it.
save water?
It's to save water.
Okay, it's a challenge to save water. then.
It's a challenge to
All right.
save water. And if you meet the first 3 cities that meet 8 of the 12 components, each get $50,000 to invest in your city in some type of water saving systems. There's a choice, but I don't want to read the whole thing. But anyway, we can make copies and.
I have the packet, what I'll do, we'll
Yeah.
talk about staff meeting, I'll send the council an email on it, and just kind of brief you on what's involved.
Right.
and-
I'll just give you a couple of challenge requirements. The first 3, adopt a low-impact development lid stormwater ordinance. Some of them are not really extremely difficult. Adopt a model water conservation ordinance. Host on the city website throughout the duration of Governor Jerry Brown's drought declaration. So you just copy what Jerry Brown has on his. So those are some of the things, but it's $50,000. It might be something that we want to do, but more than that, it would actually give our residents some drought saving
And awareness, too.
awareness. And then the second thing that they are doing is they're actually providing $2 per square foot if you remove your grass and you put in water-tolerant plants. They will give you a rebate of up to $2, and there's no limit on the square footage. So that just recently increased. It used to be $1, and now it's $2. And everything can be found on www.socalwatersmart.com. www.socalwatersmart.com. And it'll tell you how to apply, what the rebates are, what the approved projects are. And I think it's just time that we as our city leaders start making our residents aware that we need to do something regarding water conservation.
Okay,
That's it.
that's it. Councilmember
I
Viscara?
have nothing to report.
Councilmember Yu?
Nothing. Thank you.
Councilmember Chavez, or Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, 2 quick items. Last week, we conducted our interviews for our new youth committee that will take office in September. Wendy Chung, Anita Velasquez, one of our senior members of the committee, and myself did the interviews, and we were able to fill 3 vacancies for next year. And so we'll meet that group, I believe, in September, Kathy, correct? And they're already working on some projects for this summer, so they're ready to go. And just a reminder that our sister city ambassadors, our 6 students from Temple City High School, are leaving for Australia on Thursday. They're all looking forward to it and excited about their trip, and hopefully when they get back, we'll hear some reports of how well they did. So that's all I have.
Okay, I have 2 items. One's following up on I think, Councilmember Sternquist, and that's the water issues. I've talked to the city manager, and I think everybody's aware, well, you're probably not aware, but I mean, the city does not have its own water department. We have 5 different water districts that serve our city, so it's somewhat complicated, and You know, so they're imposing different requirements, and I asked to try to get our hands around what each of those is doing. What we control is what we water of our city facilities. So there's a couple different layers here, so I've asked that we come back at some future meeting and sort of address this more, you know, as you're talking about. I mean, it's being talked about, and it's appropriate that we talk about, but in the right context. The other thing I'd just like to mention that as far as city manager recruitment, we did interview candidates this last Saturday, so we're continuing through our process. We have not made a decision at this point, so it's very actively going on at this time. Okay, with that, I'll move to item 15, reimbursement of expenses to city officials for conduct of city business and for city payment of conference expenditures. Those are listed. Item 16, additional public comments on items not listed on the agenda. Mr. Jambazian.
Thank you, Mayor. Just like to follow up a little bit on Councilmember Sternquist's remarks regarding water. This was a news item that just came out tonight. Sacramento, California water regulators voted Tuesday to approve today fines up to $500 a day for residents who waste water on lawns, landscaping, and car washing, as a report showed that consumption throughout the state has actually risen amid the worst drought in nearly 4 decades. The action by the State Water Quality Control Board came after its own survey showed that conservation measures to date have failed to achieve the 20% reduction in water use sought by Governor Jerry Brown. The survey results released before the 4-0 vote showed water consumption throughout California had actually jumped by 1% this past May compared with the same month in previous years. So I think it just really speaks to what you said, but this could really impact people at $500 a day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Anyone else care to speak in the public comments? Okay, if not, we will close public comments. We are going to go into a closed session. We have 2 items. One is labor negotiations, the other possible consideration of real property acquisition. But I would like to say, since I know many of you will leave, we will be adjourning this meeting when we come back in memory of Louis Paletta, who died. At last meeting, we mentioned that he was on life support. I believe he died either that night or the next day, so we will be adjourning in his memory. He's been active in the, I believe, in the sheriff booster program. He's a World War II veteran. He was a 2012 Outstanding Older American here in Temple City. So I know Mayor Pro Tem Chavez had gone to some of the funeral arrangements. So we will be adjourning in Lou's memory. So with that, we're going to go into closed session. We are moving into closed session.
I'll stay here though.
No, you can do the property.
Are you going to do the property first?
Yeah, because that Kathy.
Convened. We have a report from the city attorney, please.
Thank you, Mayor. City Council met in closed session on two items. One was labor negotiations. We actually took that item second. Councilmember Chavez recused himself due to a financial conflict of interest. Council met with their labor negotiating team and gave direction. There was no other reportable action on that item. They also met on an item of real property and talked to the city manager as their lead real property negotiator, gave direction. There was no other reportable action on that item either. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Let's see, Councilmember Chavez was at item B, though.
Yes, the labor negotiation.
Okay, we adjourn in memory of Louis Polenta. We are adjourned. Okay, thanks, Cindy.